It was a dark and stormy night when Evelyn Blackwood first stepped through the wrought-iron gates of Blackwood Manor. The towering mansion loomed before her, its Gothic spires and turrets silhouetted against the roiling clouds overhead. Rain lashed at the window panes as a heavy wind howled through the barren trees that surrounded the estate. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around her shivering frame, her heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and curiosity. She had heard the stories, of course, the whispers that had spread through the local village of dark secrets and unspeakable horrors that were said to haunt the ancient manor. But the letter she had received, delivered by a somber-faced messenger, had been quite clear. She was the last living heir to the Blackwood estate, and the manor was now hers. With a deep breath, Evelyn pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The foyer was cavernous and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. Cobwebs clung to the vaulted ceiling, and the floor was blanketed in a thick layer of dust, as if no one had set foot in the manor for decades. Evelyn's footsteps echoed ominously as she made her way deeper into the house, her gaze sweeping over the crumbling grandeur that surrounded her. Faded tapestries hung from the walls, their once vibrant colors now muted and dull. Tarnished chandeliers dangled overhead, casting an eerie, flickering glow. And everywhere, the sense of something unseen, something watching and waiting. A sudden crash from the shadows made Evelyn jump, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around, her breath catching in her lungs as she stared into the gloom. For a moment she thought she caught a glimpse of a pale, ghostly figure, but then it was gone, vanished back into the darkness. Swallowing hard, Evelyn continued on, her footsteps quickening as she searched for the staircase that would lead her to the upper floors. She had to find her bedroom to get away from this oppressive atmosphere, to escape the feeling of being observed by unseen eyes. At last, she reached a grand marble staircase that twisted up into the shadows. Gripping the ornate railing, Evelyn began to climb, her gaze fixed straight ahead as she ascended. The higher she went, the more the sense of unease grew, until she could swear that she felt a cold, spectral presence at her back, breathing down her neck. Evelyn had to fight the urge to turn and look, to confront whatever unseen force was stalking her. But she forced herself to keep moving, to focus on the task at hand. She had to find her room, to barricade herself inside and try to get some rest. Tomorrow she would begin exploring this cursed manor, determined to uncover its dark secrets. As Evelyn reached the top of the stairs, she found herself in a long, dimly lit hallway. Doors lined the walls on either side, each one seemingly identical to the last. Closing her eyes for a moment, Evelyn tried to remember the instructions the messenger had given her. "Your room is the second door on the left, my lady," the man had said, his voice low and grave. I would advise you to keep to yourself and not wander the manor after dark. There are things here that no living soul should ever witness. Evelyn shuddered at the memory, her fingers trembling as she reached for the handle of the second door on the left. The door creaked open with a groan, and Evelyn stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in her new surroundings. The bedroom was vast and ornate, with high ceilings and elaborate moldings. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center of the room, its heavy velvet curtains drawn back to reveal crisp, pristine sheets. A large fireplace stood against one wall, its grate empty and cold. And in the far corner, a tall, gilded mirror stood, its surface reflecting the flickering light of the single candle that Evelyn had lit. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, feeling a little of the tension leaving her body. This room, at least, did not seem to be haunted by the same oppressive atmosphere that had pervaded the rest of the manor. With a small sigh of relief, she crossed the room and began to unpack her meager belongings, determined to make this place feel like a home, no matter how unsettling the rest of Blackwood Manor might be. As night fell, Evelyn settled into her new bed, pulling the thick comforter up to her chin. The howling wind outside seemed to grow louder, and the old house creaked and groaned with every gust. Evelyn tried to ignore the eerie sounds, focusing instead on her book, but she found that she couldn't concentrate, her eyes constantly darting toward the darkened corners of the room. After a while, she gave up, setting the book aside with a sigh. Reaching over, she extinguished the candle, casting the room into near-total darkness. She lay there, staring up at the shadowy canopy above her, straining her ears for any unusual sounds. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans, the whistling of the wind through the ancient manor. But then, Evelyn thought she heard something else, a faint, scratching noise, as if something was moving in the shadows. She held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears as she listened intently. The scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine, and she pulled the covers up to her chin, her fingers clutching the fabric in a white-knuckled grip. Whatever was making that sound, it was getting closer. Suddenly, a loud thump came from the far corner of the room, near the mirrored vanity. Evelyn froze, her eyes wide with terror, as she stared into the gloom. She could see nothing, but the scratching sound had intensified, accompanied now by a faint, unearthly moaning. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as a shadowy figure began to take shape, emerging from the darkness like a specter. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to move with a jerky, unnatural grace. Evelyn's heart pounded as the figure drew nearer, its features still obscured by the shadows. Then, the figure stepped into the faint moonlight that filtered in through the window, and Evelyn had to stifle a scream. The thing's face was a nightmare, a grotesque mask of twisted, decaying flesh. Its eyes were sunken pits, and its mouth was a gaping, toothless maw that emitted a low, gurgling moan. Evelyn pressed herself back against the headboard, her mind racing with terror. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a nightmare conjured by her own overactive imagination. But the creature's presence was undeniable, its hollow gaze boring into her very soul. Suddenly, the thing let out a bone-chilling shriek, and Evelyn knew that she was not dreaming. This was real, and she was trapped in a house that was haunted by something unspeakably evil. Without thinking, Evelyn threw herself out of the bed, sprinting toward the door. But before she could reach it, the creature blocked her path, its long, skeletal fingers reaching out to grab her. Evelyn let out a terrified scream, stumbling backward as the thing advanced. She felt the hard wood of the vanity against her back, and she turned, desperately trying to find some way to escape. Her eyes landed on the mirror, and a spark of hope flickered in her chest. If she could just get to the other side, maybe she could lose the creature in the manor's winding corridors. With a deep breath, Evelyn braced herself, then threw herself forward, crashing through the mirror's surface. Glass shattered around her, and she felt a searing pain as the shards cut into her skin. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, as she tumbled into the darkness beyond the mirror. Evelyn found herself in a long, dimly lit hallway, the walls lined with more tall, ornate mirrors. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the stinging of her wounds, and began to run, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, she could hear the creature's unearthly screams echoing through the hallway, and the sound spurred her on, fueling her desperate sprint. She ran and ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, until at last she stumbled into a small, cramped room. Evelyn slammed the door shut behind her, leaning against it as she fought to catch her breath. She was in what appeared to be a forgotten servant's quarters, the air thick with the scent of must and decay. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Evelyn's gaze swept the room, searching for any sign of the creature. But there was no sign of the thing, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of relief. Maybe she had managed to lose it in the maze of mirrors and hallways, but the relief was short-lived. As Evelyn's breathing began to slow, she became aware of another sound, a faint scratching noise that seemed to be coming from the far corner of the room. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she whirled around, her eyes wide with terror. There, in the shadows, she could see a figure moving, a pale skeletal hand emerging from the gloom. Evelyn stifled a scream, her fingers fumbling for the doorknob behind her. But before she could turn it, the creature stepped forward, its hollow eyes fixed on her with a predatory intensity. Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat as she stared into the thing's face, its features a twisted, nightmarish caricature of a human. It let out a low, guttural growl, and Evelyn knew that she had to get out of this room, had to find a way to escape this cursed manor on her. Turning, she wrenched the door open and fled, her footsteps echoing through the hallway as she ran. She could hear the creature behind her, its unearthly cries reverberating through the ancient walls. Evelyn ran blindly, her mind consumed by sheer terror. She ducked through doorways, raced down corridors, and scrambled up staircases, her only focus on putting as much distance between herself and the creature as possible. At last, she found herself in a grand, ornate library, the bookshelves reaching up to the high, vaulted ceiling. Evelyn slammed the door behind her, her heart pounding in her chest as she searched frantically for a way to barricade it. But as she turned, she froze, her blood running cold. The library was not empty. Sitting in a high-backed chair by the fireplace was a figure, its features obscured by the shadows. Evelyn opened her mouth to scream, but before she could, the figure spoke, its voice soft and lilting. "Welcome, my dear. I've been expecting you." Evelyn stared in stunned silence as the figure rose from the chair, stepping into the flickering firelight. It was a woman, her face pale and elegant, her eyes gleaming with a strange, feral intensity. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The woman smiled, a chilling, predatory grin. "I am Lucinda Blackwood, the mistress of this manor, and you, my dear, are my guest." Evelyn felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. "Your guest? But I'm the heir to this estate. This place belongs to me now." Lucinda's smile widened, and she took a step closer, her movements fluid and graceful. "Oh, my dear, you are mistaken. This manor has always belonged to the Blackwoods, and it will continue to do so long after you are gone." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as Lucinda approached, her gaze fixed on the woman's face. There was something about her, something inhuman and unsettling, that sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. "What do you want from me?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Lucinda's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Why, I want you to join us, my dear, to become a part of this family, to embrace the darkness that dwells within these walls." Evelyn's eyes widened in horror. "No, I won't. I won't be a part of this madness." Lucinda's expression darkened, and she reached out, her fingers closing around Evelyn's arm in a vice-like grip. "Oh, but you don't have a choice. You are the last of the Blackwoods, and this manor is your legacy, and whether you like it or not, you are bound to it, and to us, forever." Evelyn tried to pull away, but Lucinda's grip was too strong. She could feel the woman's nails digging into her flesh, and she let out a pained gasp. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the library, and Evelyn glanced toward the door, her heart leaping into her throat. The creature was there, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. Lucinda's grip tightened, and she pulled Evelyn closer, her lips brushing against the young woman's ear. "You see, my dear, you are trapped, just like the rest of us. There is no escape from the darkness that consumes this place." Evelyn felt a wave of despair wash over her, and she sagged against Lucinda, her strength failing her. She had come to this manor, hoping to start a new life, to escape the tragedies of her past. But now she realized that she had stumbled into a nightmare from which she might never awaken. As the creature drew closer, Evelyn closed her eyes, bracing herself for the end. But instead of pain, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Lucinda's grip had loosened, and the woman was whispering something in her ear, her voice low and soothing. "It will all be over soon, my dear. Just surrender to the darkness, and you will find peace. We will take care of you, forever and always." Evelyn felt her consciousness slipping away, her mind becoming hazy and unfocused. The sounds of the creature's approach faded into the distance, and she found herself drifting, lost in a sea of shadows. When Evelyn finally awoke, she found herself in an unfamiliar room, the walls adorned with faded tapestries and ancient, crumbling furniture. She blinked her eyes, trying to remember how she had ended up here, but her mind was a blank. Slowly, Evelyn sat up, wincing as a sharp pain shot through her head. She reached up, gingerly touching the bandage that was wrapped around her forehead, and a sense of unease began to slowly creep into her mind. Where was she? And how had she ended up in this strange, foreboding place? As Evelyn looked around the room, her gaze fell upon a large, ornate mirror that stood in the corner. She stared at her own reflection, taking in the sight of her pale, drawn features and the haunted look in her eyes. Suddenly, a movement in the mirror caught her eye, and Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. There, in the reflection, she could see the figure of a woman standing behind her, her face obscured by the shadows. Evelyn whirled around, her breath catching in her throat, but the room was empty. She stared at the mirror, her eyes narrowing as she searched for any sign of the mysterious woman. But there was nothing, just her own reflection staring back at her, a look of fear and confusion etched across her face. Evelyn took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm her nerves. She had to get out of here, to find a way to escape this cursed manor and the darkness that seemed to cling to its very walls. But as Evelyn moved to stand, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over her, and she sank back down onto the bed, her head spinning. She could hear a distant, eerie sound, like the faint whispers of voices echoing through the corridors. Evelyn strained to listen, her brow furrowed in concentration. The voices seemed to be calling to her, beckoning her to join them in the shadows. She shook her head, desperate to resist the strange pull, but the voices only grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the mirror, its features distorted and twisted. Evelyn let out a terrified gasp, scrambling backward on the bed as the thing stepped out of the glass, its long, skeletal limbs reaching toward her. Evelyn tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat as the creature advanced on her, its hollow eyes fixed on her with a hungry, predatory gaze. She pressed herself against the headboard, her heart pounding in her ears as she